Welcome to week 6 of Georgetown University's School of Continuing Studies Applied Intelligence program. Uh, to start off with a couple of announcements. So paper 2 is due now, yesterday, depending on when you're watching this. So I'll get those back to you next week. The Zoom session we had on Thursday, I think, was a very good overview, groups 1 through 3. Kudos to all the groups, and I just want to emphasize that I was critical of all the groups, but that's just part of the course. I want to make sure that you're owed my candor, you're owed my criticism, and the criticism is meant not to be critical, but for you to improve upon for next briefing or your future career development. So please take it as that, not as me just trying to poke holes in folks. And then the next Zoom session, groups 4 through 6, will be 17 October in just over 2 weeks. So please, again, groups 4 through 6 will be on. Please take those lessons learned if you sat in for groups 1 through 3. And what I'll also do is a job talk. Then I'll talk about jobs, careers in the defense community and in the intelligence community. So please have your questions ahead of time for me. And please, if you have experience hiring people, please let me know as well so I can get your input as well. I'm not omnipotent on this topic, so I want to make sure everyone has the full range of potential advice and internships out there if they want a career in the government. So current events, the whistleblower. Unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past week, I think everyone's familiar with the whistleblower, with the charges of the whistleblower, and the subsequent impeachment inquiry. Not impeachment total, but the initial investigation by Congress into the whistleblower's actions, or the president's actions based on the whistleblower's complaint. I'm not going to get into politics here. I don't want to get into the political issues and the dynamics, especially because we don't have all the information. But what I do want to say is this was a news story because the whistleblower is coming from the intelligence community and presumably has credibility. He had insider information and he was from the supposed truthful intelligence community. And that's why it was picked up by the news story. That's why it was talked about in the Sunday morning talk shows this morning. So I just want you to be aware that, again, he or she had a lot more credence than if this had been a Washington Post investigation or another outlet from the media. So keep that in mind for future positions that the American people still hold or for the most part, our government bureaucrats and our intelligence community personnel in somewhat high regard in this day and age. So, review of week 5. When does radicalization get monitored further? So we went through 4 case studies: EU, Christmas Day bomber, Boston, and the Fort Hood shooting. And unlike 9/11, where it was a little bit more clear-cut, where it was a foreign terrorist organization involved in a massive plot to conduct a widespread violent act, now it's lone wolves, 1 or 2 offs that are radicalized by the internet or other sources that conduct low-level attacks, for lack of a better term. And the question is, when do we put these people on the radar screen? If I were to watch ISIS propaganda from my computer at home, do I deserve to be put on a list somewhere for further scrutiny? Now, there's 2 problems with that. One, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that do that. And it would, even in our days of big data and analytics, it would still be a massive project to monitor all those folks. And even if we could, there's First Amendment free speech issues, particularly in the United States. I am allowed to watch ISIS propaganda in the privacy of my own home. that is, well, one, you have to define what ISIS propaganda is, or terrorist related propaganda, and I'm allowed to do that. It's a free country. So do I get further monitored if I were to do that? What happens if I take it a step further and now I like, as you can do on YouTube or on Facebook, I like an ISIS related Facebook or Instagram or Twitter account? Do I deserve further scrutiny? I've definitely gone from a passive viewer to a more active viewer than that. Now, there's still tens of thousands of people that have liked various Al-Qaeda and ISIS extremist websites. So do I deserve further monitoring if I were to like? Let's take it a step further. Let's say I engage in a chat room or GChat or email on an ISIS forum. Then have I stepped over a line where I've gone from passive viewer to active enabler? When do I get further monitoring? And then the next step is, not only have I stated on my emailed with ISIS, but now I've stated in my emails intent that might be troublesome. That deserves further scrutiny. There's a good example, Hassan versus Hassan. Nidal Hassan was the Fort Hood shooter. He went under the radar until he was, for the most part, he was never arrested. Hassan is the Coast Guard, for those of you who remember, in Maryland, who had stockpiled weapons. He was listening to right-wing extremism. He stockpiled weapons. He had made threats, and he communicated over a government server that led the investigators to believe that he had sufficient intent to conduct an attack. There certainly was, maybe it was better investigative techniques, and that's part of it, but also the Coast Guard person used a government server, which really tipped people off. So, at what level does radicalization get further scrutiny? And then I have to ask the question, there's probably a difference between ISIS websites, people interacting with those, and right-wing extremists like 4chan or 8chan and Daily Stormer, that hundreds of thousands of people interact with on a daily basis. Do they deserve further scrutiny? Do they deserve to be databased for their actions? These are questions I don't have an answer to, but something for you to think about. What do we do for people on the radar? I call it minding the gap, which is, and you saw that in the EU documentary, Nidal Hassan was arguably on the radar. The Boston Marathon bombers were on the radar of law enforcement. The Orlando shooter was on the radar of law enforcement. So they were on the radar, but in a free society, there was not enough to arrest. So there was a gap between the two that still allowed whomever to conduct that attack. How do we stop, or how do we operate in that gap? How do we, there's watch lists, no-fly lists that can mitigate this a little bit, but Nidal Hassan's a perfect example. Even if we had put the case together that he was communicating with Anwar al-Awlaki and he was exhibiting these radical tendencies, there was still not enough to arrest him. He might have been kicked out of the military, but hey, he can go to any place at Fort Hood, outside of Fort Hood, and conduct a shooting. So what do we do for people on the radar of law enforcement? And Nidal Hassan, again, didn't commit a crime till he opened fire in that soldier in processing center. That's, again, an answer I don't have. Do we have the appropriate funding structures and people? We've spent billions, trillions since 9/11. Do we need to spend more? That'd be a hard ask to make, but is the problem in more money, better communications between federal officials and local law officials? And again, information is collected at the federal level, all sorts of information, whether it's sensitive intelligence information or travel histories from immigration and customs, that is not disseminated down to local officials. Do we need to rethink our structures so that we could be more preventative and proactive. And then lastly, and this is controversial, and I'll let you decide, should we just accept that this is going to happen? In a free society, especially in the United States where it's readily accessible to getting guns, should we just accept that we're going to have these lone wolf, whether it's right-wing extremism or Islamic extremism or just mentally ill people conducting these widespread attacks? A lot of people say, no, that's not acceptable. But again, the chances of you being in one of these, despite what you see in the media, chances of you being in a mass shooting or right there with, getting hit by lightning or drowning in your bathtub. And should we just maybe accept it? That's the cost of our freedoms in a free society. I'll let you decide. But then, again, questions to ponder. So week 6, criminal intelligence. So shifting gears a little bit, you have the Lemieux lecture. I've kicked it off to our program director, who's an expert in this area. You have CompStat, which is not a computer program, but a series of accountability measures for police precincts and for police captains and others to see if they're successful or not. And many people attribute CompStat as a huge driver for the decline in crime that we saw from the 80s and 90s to even now. And that's what I want you to ask. What led to the decline in crime? Was it better criminal intelligence process, better police processes, or was it other things? A better economy, demographics where the baby boomers aged out of that prime criminal area. Other theories have gone out that lead. We removed lead from water and from paint, and that led to the decrease in crime. Stephen Levitt at the University of Chicago has argued that abortion, the legalization of abortion, has led to the decrease in crime. And I'm not going to get into the pro-life, pro-choice issue here, but his argument is that the people that would be committing crimes in the 80s and 90s were aborted in the 70s. Again, that's his theory, but one of the theories that is out there for the decline in crime. So I want you to determine, is the CompStat and the other police intelligence methods one of the drivers for the decline in crime. And then we're talking about law enforcement technologies. We looked at the Boston Marathon last week from an intelligence perspective. Now we're going to look at it from a technology investigative perspective. And we're going to ask, are those technologies, whether it's CCTV, better forensics, that led to the capture of the Boston Marathon bombers, can those be replicated and scaled up? Not just for these high-profile crimes, but for all crimes, and can that lead to overall decreases in crime going forward? And a lot of money has been spent on CCTVs. A lot of money has been spent on some of these other forensic techniques that you'll see. Is it worth it? Is it scalable? That's the question I want you to ask as you're going through it. So if there's questions or issues, let me know, and I look forward to reading your papers.